Ladies and gentlemen, this is the next episode of the Zez Retro Zezcast, and I'm flying solo today to talk to a very interesting homebrew developer who's doing some very relevant stuff that I think many people have been interested in. Here, I've got Konrad Beckmann here. He's from Sweden, and he's been doing a lot of work recently sticking up a Raspberry Pico into the N64 and seeing what he can do with it. He came up with the Pico card 64, a flash card basically made from the innards of a Pi Pico, and also has been working on a HDMI-like digital output solution for the N64. Very interesting homebrew projects that have generated a lot of interest on social media. So I wanted to sit down, pick through them, see what's going on with Konrad. So Konrad, how you doing, mate? Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm doing great. And thanks for the introduction. It's accurate.
So there's a lot of interesting stuff to get into. Not only, and I'm going to get into today, not only the cool projects you've done, looking at the technicalities, but I'm very, very interested in how you've managed the community, how you've managed expectations. Whenever you come out with something cool, everyone's like, "Oh, I gotta do it, gotta have it now," and people go wild. So how to deal with that, and some of your thoughts maybe you have if someone else is doing a project. But before we get to that, mate, so you are Swedish and you live in the south of Sweden in Malmö.
That's right.
How's life in Malmö? Is the winter leaving you right now slowly?
Yeah, it's kind of raining and gray, so kind of perfect Swedish weather. Yep.
Still better than the dark of the winter, right? You're like cold
True.
and raining. Yeah, this is a little better. I'm over in Estonia, maybe almost on the same. What to say?
Right. Yeah.
Is that longitude? Is that long latitude?
I guess latitude.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I always
the
mix
same
them
line.
up.
Yeah, I know. The same line almost, the same height. So, yeah, it's cool to talk. So, people may be following your different projects that you've done. A lot of hacking around Pico, a lot of hacking around N64. Let's start from the beginning. I mean, do you have did you study this stuff? Do you have a degree in this stuff? Are you working in this stuff? I don't know where to start. Help us where to start with your story about how you came to retro and hacking this stuff.
So basically, I guess it goes back to I've always been poking around computers since I was little. I've been programming for a really long time, and I love understanding or trying to understand how things work. And so eventually, I started working with the programming, and I've been doing that for my whole professional career. And during that time, I've sort of switched over from more application level programming into more embedded programming. So that's what I'm doing right now. So I write firmware for low level microcontrollers and stuff like that. So as side projects at home, I sort of dabble in FPGAs and try to understand more about how ASICs work and try to really go low level as I can. And while doing that, I sort of explore and find interesting chips like the Raspberry Pi Pico, which is an incredible device because inside it there's like a normal CPU, but there's also the PIO, the programmable IO, which is basically like a super efficient single. I don't know how technical I should go, but it's
pretty
very
technical here.
Yeah. But it's like an FPGA, so to say. It's a state machine that you can program, so you get really high really low latency and can do some really interesting stuff with it. Yeah.
So this chip, it's sort of like an FPGA. Is it like? How would you compare it? Is it the light? Is it like a ghetto version that's done in a different way, but it's cheaper and it's available, so that's useful? Why is that particular chip useful in the Pico contents? Yeah.
So the key is the PIO, which is essentially it lets you write really small programs that do a lot with the IO pins. So essentially you can write a few instructions that say, take the 16 bits from the IO pins and put them into this buffer. And you can do some very simple logic and wait for pins to go high, to go low. So you can sample data after you get a clock and stuff like that. So if you would have done that with a normal microcontroller where you do a while loop, you wait for a pin to go high, and then you sample 16 pins that are like on different banks and stuff, then you might get different data, bad data latching and stuff like that. Because when you have low latency requirements, essentially when the data flow over a wide bus has to be sort of at the same time, That's not always possible to sample with a normal microcontroller, but PIO lets you do that, and that's a killer feature.
That's very interesting. So by a normal microcontroller, my experience there, so I mean, just to set it up, I have a degree in computer science. I've done the Java. Most of my stuff was around actually almost the opposite of you, which was high level integrations, integrating systems together. So hooking up, the SAP to the database, the front end to the back end, two different systems that couldn't ordinarily hook up, trying to hook them up via maybe a database connection or some other weird web service call, or really high level stuff, right? Almost the opposite of where you're coming from. So that was my background, but I've done a little bit of Arduino code. And so by you saying it's too slow, and at the programmatic level, you like Arduino code would be an example of that it's not moving fast enough for you to be able to do sequential latches.
Yeah, exactly. Because you would have to essentially have one instruction sampling each pin more or less, which will be not correct. You will get different data at a different time, basically. But with PIO, you can sample, I think it's up to 30 pins at the same time, and it will be sampled in the exact same clock cycle. So there won't be any delays between banks and stuff like that. And also you can do outputs in the same program. So you can sample some data, do some very small processing with it, and output it on another pin, which is really interesting. It opens up a lot of possibilities. Yeah.
Okay. And this, and also, I don't want to jump too far ahead, but I know you were migrating away some of your designs from the Pi Pico to the, what do you call it? RP4, what is it?
So RP2040 is the name of it's the chip. It's the Raspberry Pi Pico chip. Mm-hmm. It's called RP2040. But the Raspberry Pi Pico is a device. It's the board that you can buy for $8. Mm-hmm. But the chip itself is just $1, basically. So if you want to make your own system using the same technology as the Pico, you buy an RP2040 chip together with some flash and make your own board. And essentially your bill of materials, the cost of the whole system, can get like under $5, basically.
True. So it's not like the $10 of a Pico was that much to begin with, but I see where you mean. I see so when you put the RP2040, does it have the PIO, was it? With that extra, it has that feature as well.
Yeah, correct. It's inside the chip.
Yes. It's inside the chip. Okay. So that makes it, because I saw that you were moving away from the Pico. You're moving into the stamp size design because that fit a little bit easier around. Yeah, so the cost and the fit?
Exactly. So one thing with the Pico device is that it doesn't bring out all of the pins that the chip has. So there are more pins than there are on the Pico device. So that's why so the Pico cart, the first iteration of that, there I was using the stamp, which is done by my friend who's basically made a stamp-sized PCB that contains the RP2040 and some flash and some voltage regulators. And it lets you just use all of the pins in a very simple way. So essentially, I made a very simple PCB in the form factor of a cart with this stamp-sized Pico. And I brought out all of the pins to connect to an SD card reader and some extra pins and so on. So
okay. So when you used the stamp, the stamp device that exposed enough pins that you were able to, on one side, hook up to all the N64, the cart lines, and you were able to hook up, what else have we got? Is there extra flash, or is the SD card reader definitely? What are the sort of the other major components of the Pico Cart 64 that need to be connected to the chip?
Yeah, so it's SD card, but there was also some extra pins from the N64. So the N64 has the cart pins, which is basically address and data. There's the CIC chip pins for the copyright protection security chip, whatever you want to call it. But then there's also some extra pins for there's a serial bus like EEPROM pins and stuff like that. So in order to connect everything together, basically the normal Pico didn't really have enough pins. But yeah, so what I ended up doing is, after I released this, I got a lot of feedback from the community, which was really helpful. So I ended up doing this PicoCart V1 Lite, which is, it lets you solder on a normal Raspberry Pi Pico. Anybody can do this. Like, it's really simple soldering. So you go to a store, you buy a normal Pico, you get one of these PCBs that you can order from JLC and stuff like that, and you solder it with a normal sort of not fine-pitched soldering iron. And you don't need a microscope and stuff like that. And then you have a homebrew. You can run your homebrew on your N64. As simple as that. So that's sort of why I wanted to do this. Yeah.
Okay, so there's two. Now, that version, though, if you go back to the Pico and use that version, which is easier to make, you're telling me, but is that the version that doesn't have enough pins so you can only do one game at a time? You can't have an SD card? Is that
correct?
The draw, or whatever, the trade-off, sorry, is the word I'm looking for.
Yeah, trade-off, yeah.
Okay, so there's two versions of that you're looking to make, because I was looking at some of the PCBs that you got sent, which the postage stamp one, that's the more advanced version. Yeah,
so basically the whole project started with a stamp version, because I wanted to get started really quickly, and so I ended up using that because it was close to me. I had one of those stamps laying around. But then I wanted to make it even more accessible to normal people to just, you buy a normal Pico and you buy a PCB and you solder it, as easy as that. But it also has limitations. The flash size is quite limited, and there is no SD card and stuff like that. So I actually made a second version, the PicoCart V2, and that is in heavy development. It's not done yet. So there I wanted to support 64 megabyte cards. I wanted to support SD card. I wanted to add Wi-Fi support. Basically a proper card. And this turned out to be a really complex project, way more than I anticipated. And I was moving the last half year, so that kind of got shelved and has been on the back burner. I haven't really had time to look into it further, but it's cooking. Yeah.
Okay, and so the more advanced version, that's definitely using the stamp version because you need those extra pins for all the Wi-Fi and the SD card.
So for the V2, it's actually, there I'm using the raw chip myself, and actually two of them, because the pins are not enough. So I have, it's unnecessarily complex. It gets into is it worth doing? Is it better to just use an FPGA territory? But still, the BOM is basically $15 or something like that, and it gives you all the features you can dream of. But it's not done.
I think that's the one I saw recently. Right, it's got two of those, the RP2040s on the one board. But I saw that picture that you made. There's a lot of fine pitch soldering to be done.
Oh, definitely, yes.
In that, okay. So, right, because I saw that and I went, I'm not going to attempt it. I'll wait till things get a little bit easier before I have a go at that, at least.
No, so exactly. So the idea with the V2 is I picked components that are in the JLC PCBA, part library. So essentially, as a DIY person who don't necessarily have the soldering skills, you can still order such a board without relying on sort of a big production run of 100 or 1,000 units. You can still do it yourself. That was sort of the goal. But it's still way less accessible than just, slapping a Pico onto a board,
Okay, so the original version, the easy version, let's call it, light version as you're calling it, it doesn't have all the fine soldering of small resistors and things like that. Is there anything else to solder besides the Pico?
Well, there is one resistor and one MOSFET, but they are sort of almost optional. And also, the MOSFET is there in order to power the board in a safe way from the N64, and so it doesn't conflict with the USB. And the resistor is actually not really needed because there is an internal resistor on the Pico board. I just put it there for safe measure. Yeah, well, that's it.
2 is not so bad anyway. Even if you still try, you can get it around 2. So, okay, so these two versions are really interesting. I don't even know where to start. So the second version, actually, the more advanced version that you're still theorizing and working on. So larger ROMs, very good. SD card, obviously very good. Tell me a little bit about your thinking and and adapting this. So with Wi-Fi, do you have the RetroNAS project in mind to be able to pull ROMs directly? Is that what the Wi-Fi would be for, or is it just for updating firmware?
So to be completely honest, I'm not that deep into the retro scene. I don't know which tools people are using and so on. I just do it for myself, more or less.
Sure.
But my personal goal is I want to have a... how should I explain this? I want to be able to develop on my N64 without hassle. Okay. So I want to be able to upload new ROMs via Wi-Fi, basically load the ROM in real time and stuff like that. All of this, it doesn't exist yet, but that's sort of my goal. And I also want to be able to print debug prints from the N64 program and read it on my computer over Wi-Fi. That would be insane. I would love that.
That's cool. So the RetroNAS project is a really interesting one, and one that I run at home. So it's built off, you just do regular Debian Linux install, and then it's just really a bunch of shell scripts around, and it'll set up a proper Samba for you, SMB, and it'll be like correct that you'll actually be able to access it from Windows. Whenever I try to set up SMB and Samba myself, it never works from some device. And then you could say, hey, make me a share that's an SMB share that's right for Mista. Make me an SMB share that's right for the PS3. I'm having pretty good results playing PS3 discs over the network. And it's designed to you could just snap in modules. So, there's one for the GameCube that will use the broadband adapter that goes in under the bottom. But it's using, I think it's using some really lightweight file system that I'm totally blanking on the name right now, because Samba was even too much for it. So it's using different, you can snap in different protocols quite easily. So having, I don't know, Samba or some other protocol where you could pull ROMs from is sort of the lofty goal that many like Bob at Retro RGB are trying to propose right now. Just in general, hey, wouldn't it be great if we could keep all of our ROMs on this server and just have to stream them to individual flash cards? Yeah,
that makes sense. Not having to have 10 different systems, yeah.
Yeah, I find that a little bit now. Like, if you've got, for example, PS2 with a hard disk in it, I mean, very good and very fast and a reasonable solution, but yeah, you've got to pull that disc out when you want to add more ROMs to it or something like that. And it's true with an SD card like you're proposing. Not very hard, I admit, but nevertheless, we're geeks, so we go for these finely, maybe over-engineered solutions.
Yeah, and that's why I put the Wi-Fi chip on there. So the chip is there. I just need to write some firmware on both sides to interface with it and to connect and all of that stuff. It's a fun challenge. I just haven't gotten there.
Yeah, man. And of course, absolutely, you're doing so well with this. I want to go back to, it was last summer when you sort of made the first big announcement about you had something going with Pico N64, and we were all very amazed that this guy most of us hadn't heard of before, and all of a sudden he's got this very cheap flash card solution. We're like, this is cool. And that, your project was just in the starting days then, but you had a working prototype, and obviously this is generating interest. So many people are interested in this, but the project is still in early days. Tell me about the interest that you got in those days, and how did you, like, dealing with a lot of expectations from the community, a lot of people that all of a sudden want to help. How did you have to filter? I mean, people that want to help, did you have to filter through that? Tell us through those early days of the initial attention that a project gets.
Yeah, so actually I started up a Discord, and I haven't really had my own personal Discord before, but that actually worked out quite well. People who joined were positive, helpful, and not at all trolley behavior like, oh, when is it done? Give it to me, blah, blah, blah. Not like that at all. I just had positive experience. So I'm really happy to have had that. And there's a bunch of people in the community now that are, I'm able to discuss technical topics and iterate on solutions and so on. And actually there's, since I more or less paused the development of Pico Cart because of I was moving and didn't have time to do stuff and so on, and there was a lot of interest. There is actually a fork of the project where a lot of the sort of more advanced support is being worked on, and eventually I don't really have a good plan on how to handle this in the future, but probably we're gonna do a merge, and it's gonna be upstream. I don't know. We'll see. But there's a lot of people in the community who are helping out and doing stuff that is helpful. So it's great.
Okay, so is that other project? Is that the Daisy Drive 64?
So Daisy Drive is a little bit different.
Okay.
That's another project, completely separate. So what that is using actually a microcontroller, an STM32 H750, I think, which is a pretty fast and capable microcontroller, where we are running in, I think it's over 400 megahertz, and essentially what it's doing, it manages to implement the CART protocol and respond in time with low latency. But it's also using external SD-RAM up to, I think it's 64 megabyte. So it sort of solves a lot of problems. But it's also running, I think it is overclocked, and it's pushing the limits of that microcontroller. So it's also an interesting project for sure, taking a different approach. And again, like the whole reason I did Pico Kart was because it was fun and because I could do it.
Sure.
So it was, yeah.
And if I understood also with the Daisy Drive, that microcontroller, that chip, I looked it up. That was like $27 or $30 or something like this for that. So already very different price ranges for that project anyway, clearly differentiating your projects.
Yeah, that's true.
That's fair enough, man. Yeah, I mean, that's so interesting, the way that the open source community now, independent people have different ideas, then they start getting together, you make your own things, and I like the way that you don't view this as competition. You're happy that somebody's out there hacking this stuff, learning, someone's doing that for you. And I like the way that, at least when you were humble enough as well there's these forks and you want to work with these people, when you understood that you couldn't carry on, because this is sort of where I was going with this early thing. When your opinions on when to announce a project. Early is nice because you get some attention and maybe you get some cool devs, but then do you get unrealistic expectation versus releasing a little bit later? Looking back almost a year ago, do you think you still would have announced Pico at Pico Kart at the same time?
I think so, actually, because in the end, it's an enabler. What I released back then was a board that was very cheap, and it enabled homebrew, and it worked. It might not be able to run, the biggest games, but that was not my intention either. It's an enabler, and I'm happy to have released that. Yeah.
Sure, man. Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And also, I would say now you have a track record in this. Hey, we've heard of Konrad. He drops these projects. They're great. Something goes on, and I think there's initially when someone comes, quote unquote, out of nowhere. I understand you didn't come out of nowhere, but anyway, that people could be like, oh, he makes a big fuss and a big song and dance, and then nothing happens of that project. So I'm glad that you now have this established track record. Like, yeah, look, I can take this to the next level. Okay, I'm going to pause it a little bit. That's normal that people need, but forks happen, progress still happened because you created a bit of a community and enabled those people in your community. This project was able to grow larger than you. How's it been to, have you had to do a little bit of mentoring, or how's your relationship with the people around you? Are some of them just like crazy geniuses, or how have you sort of interacted with those people brought into this project?
So fortunately, I haven't had to do that much micromanagement and, that kind of stuff. It just, I don't know, it just happens. The right people ended up in the Discord, and now cool stuff is happening. I don't know how to explain it.
That's good, man. Okay, that's nice that it happens like that. That you've got. I think this comes back to sort of you've got the correct base attitude, and when you have that, even whether it's conscious or unconscious, sounds a little unconscious. You're too humble, I think. People will corral around that. They will gather around that when they see what you've done, and they see that you're willing to share your ideas, share your code, share the next thing. So that's going really well.
Yeah. So I've always been doing sort of open source projects, like everything that I upload on the internet in some way, like I put a video or something on Twitter, there is always source code to back it up. I don't just post something for, posting it. I post it in order to enable other people to experience it and maybe learn from it, maybe take it to the next level. And I think that's really interesting to see when somebody else takes what you have done and does something different with it, repurpose it, or take it to another device or whatever. It's really interesting to see, and that's why I do it. Yeah.
Cool, man. Let's. I'm gonna jump back a little bit. What's the first computer that you owned, or console, I guess, whatever? What was the first thing?
I think it was a 386 or 486, a PC DOS. That was where I grew up, and my first game was probably either Prince of Persia or Wolfenstein, perhaps.
Nice. Did you have any consoles when you were younger, or only PC?
No. So my family had a very strict sort of no consoles. We have computers, because computers, there you can learn to program, which is good. So I've actually only played over at the friends' houses. The whole NES, SNES, N64 and stuff like that has only been over at friends. So it's now when I'm a little bit older that I can sort of, hey, why don't I just buy a console and look at it again. So that's what I've been doing now.
Hey, I'm a fucking adult. I could do this now. This is great. Yeah.
Yeah.
My family as well. It's funny you said that same reasoning. The computer can be used for stuff, for education, possibly, maybe for school. It's a thing, but not those nasty home consoles. Oh, they're so, they're just for games. That was definitely an attitude in my family as well. And talk about at a young age, I had the normalization of piracy. Absolutely. My father wanted to buy a computer because we could copy games and you didn't have to buy them all like a console.
Yeah. What should I say? Back in the day, it was back in the day.
That's what we did. My dad's like, we can copy all. I had an Amiga before that. We copy the games on the Amiga. We don't have to buy them. I'm like, I guess, can't really argue with that, Dad. Okay. So, okay. So, and you start, so you were hacking around. Now, did you study, you said you started at an application level stuff. Is that what you studied at university?
So I studied computer science, but I dropped out in the first year. It just wasn't really, it was too proper. I don't know. But anyway, I started working with sort of user interface rendering engine company that made sort of mobile graphics engines to various mobile phone vendors. It was really educational for me. I learned so much in that job. So I think education is cool, but doing stuff in the reality is also really useful. Yeah.
Okay. And so bit by bit, so you were just able to sort of pick the technologies up, and for you, school was a bit of a drag and it wasn't easy to focus, so it was a bit easier for you to just go out and pick this stuff up on your own and move forward there. Is that your style of learning, that you're just more
Definitely.
Self-directed?
I'm what do you call it, a goal. Like if I have a goal, I will reach it in some way, and then I have to learn signal processing or this math or that math. It's okay, I'll pick it up. But not the other way around, where you start with the foundation and then eventually you learn something that you don't understand what it is for, and then 5 years later you sort of have to remember, oh, okay, so this I don't know, super mathy deep thing is useful in this particular problem. So I work the other way around. I have a problem and I will do my best to solve it.
Yeah, I think there's some. I mean, I guess it's been 20 years since I've been in since I got my degree. But kind of reflecting back now, I feel like computer science, yes, very technical. I had to learn the maths. I'm terrible at the maths. I scraped through, I had one in second year, and I scraped through that. And everything else, when it came to theory of algorithms, I kind of just got through the best I could. And very theory focused. And even when I look back, and say we're even studying a topic like SQL. SQL could be a very useful thing. I'm not super sure how useful it is anymore to have but we learned the real deep stuff, right? And the theory of it and the real academic, make some crazy SQL this long that updates across 3 tables at once and locks and all this crap. And there's sort of something in the middle. yes, a computer science degree is a higher school education going for, I don't know, PhD or something, but that's not kind of necessarily reflecting the bulk of who's just writing code these days. It doesn't have to be that, well, mathematical. Maybe that's the big problem I'm finding here. The maths and the theory is too hard. I just want to code some stuff sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I've sort of always, like looking back when I was in my teens, I guess, I was just spending way too much time at my computer, and I, coded stuff because it was fun. I reversed some stuff because I wanted to look under the hood, and trying to understand assembly code and C code and how does the thing tick, and just dig around, and that's how I sort of ended up with my knowledge. And then I got my job, and I could apply that which I knew and also learn a lot of new stuff from what I was working with. So that was really useful.
Were you connected to the internet via a dial-up modem?
So my first modem was, I guess, a 28.8.
Okay, nice.
Yeah. We had internet back in 95. I remember we had Algonet back in Sweden.
So even in 95, you were dialing up to an ISP to connect to what was the internet back then?
Yeah.
Dang. And it was, that's part of those things where, I guess as a little Australian kid, we would have thought, oh, those Europeans are so fancy with their infrastructure and they're able to do things. So that was it particularly expensive then? Because all I remember was like by the hour, it was $5 an hour and all this stuff. Like, how were you? Was it just a good play? How did they happen to have that in Malmö?
If I remember correctly, back in 95, 96, like in the really early days of the internet, it was a local phone number, like calling your neighbor, basically. But then a little bit later, there popped up these sort of modem pool, different numbers where you got a different billing plan. I really don't remember how this works. It's a while ago. But we got ADSL in 2001, I think.
Okay, that makes about sense. So I would have gotten ADSL about the same time. So in that case, since you had access to what was the internet then so early, did you ever do anything like pre-internet stuff? Like back in my region, we had these local BBSs, and we dialed into one guy's machine, and it was all of us, just total local nutcases. Who was, if you were connected to a modem BBS in 95, you're a nutcase, and I was one of them. Like, did you ever do anything pre-internet in your area?
So personally, that was before my time. So I remember like my dad calling into the computer shop's BBS and looking at the catalog. That's like my oldest memory of sort of pre-internet communication with a computer.
That's cool. Okay, so there was something like that going on there. That's rad. All right. I do sort of miss those days, and I understand they'll never come back where our communities were hyper-local. We were still connected. We could still get some stuff, and maybe the Doom shareware comes over the FidoNet or whatever it was, and it would come down slowly. But still, we had a little community, not like today. But, now I can talk to people in other countries, so, hey, it's good. So grow it up. So we were, we had the first computer, were computers all along. Then you eventually migrated into low-level stuff.
Right.
And where did you, was there anything or something that piqued your interest in the why? Or it's just like, I want to go lower. I want to understand this more than I understand right now.
Yeah, so essentially, like looking back into my career, it started with mobile phones, but it was always like I was only an application developer, and I didn't really understand how stuff actually works. So we had like JTAG and debuggers and stuff, but I never really fully understood how that worked. And later on, I just wanted to understand a little bit more. I wanted to dig deeper. So I worked at a company that did smartwatches and doing Bluetooth stuff, and I just essentially I forced myself into a new job where I would have to understand more about low-level stuff. So essentially, I just managed to get a job where I, with my current skill set, where that was enough, but with the possibility to learn one level below, so to say. So right now I'm doing, personally really interesting stuff, embedded stuff and radio stuff, and
That's cool. That first of all, you can be on the pretty much the edge for your work of what you really want to be interested in. You get paid. You're getting through your work to develop those, and of course, some of those skills are transferring into your hobby as well. That's a really nice situation you're in.
Yeah. So essentially, my hobbies is like I pick hobbies that are way outside of my comfort zone, and then I pick up stuff that makes me comfortable enough to like move my job to the next level. But yeah, here we are.
Sorry. Pardon me. I'm choking on my cup of tea here. So I wanted to get now to a project that you've been working, again, it's, as I understood, on and off for some time. But again, you've recently made some breakthroughs. And this is getting digital video out of the Nintendo 64. Now, again, this is not something that has never been done before. But you have a knack for doing it with parts that are very cheap. So tell us, let's start your journey then of, I mean, you've got this, is it like, I've got a Pico, what the hell else can I do with this Pico? And you start thinking of video?
Yep, that's basically it. So essentially, after I did a Pico cart, or maybe going a little bit back. So before Pico cart, I made an FPGA cart using, an FPGA with a embedded soft CPU and stuff. And when doing that, I was also exploring the video interface because I wanted to sort of tap into all the signals that was on the main board and just try to understand what it does. So back then, what I did was I explored this digital video interface, and I was able to capture the signals and turn them into a frame buffer and looking at the raw pixels and basically shuffle that into my PC. So now later, when I made the Pico cart, I was thinking, can I do the same with a Raspberry Pi Pico? And it turns out, yes.
So you already knew where to sniff. You knew
exactly
where to look at on the board. Okay.
Yeah, I knew where to look, and I knew the protocol. I had already done it with an FPGA, so I just need to translate that knowledge to the Pico. End of last year, I was spending quite some time trying to get this to work, but I got stuck and didn't really figure out what I was doing wrong. So now, just some week ago, I had a stab at it again. And I basically, just went through the whole code, made it simple, remove any unnecessary stuff, and I got it to work. So essentially what it does is, first, it uses PIO, which we discussed earlier, this feature of the Raspberry Pi Pico that allows me to capture the whole video, the digital video bus, which is 7 bits of RGB color, 1 sync signal, and a clock. And I can capture this. Essentially, the program is waiting for the clock to go high and then go low. And when it has gone low, then the data is stable and I can latch it. And with a PIO, this is just 2 instructions. One is wait for it to go low and then capture the data. So this data comes at 50 megahertz, which is pretty fast, but it's not unreasonably fast. And we're running at, I think, 250 megahertz. So it's a decent, we're running pretty much fast enough to be able to capture it like this.
Sure.
And what I then do is I handle the sync signals and framing so that I can sort of capture a frame buffer of the valid pixels. So now inside of the Pico chip, there is a frame buffer that contains what's on your screen.
Sure.
Now what? And this is where the Pico DVI project comes into light, which is an insane project. It actually gives you DVI-D, or HDMI, so to say, output from a Pico. So we're capturing the frame buffer, and now we can output it as well. So tying these 2 things together, we have ourselves a HDMI out from the N64, basically.
So interesting. So many bits I want to dig in on this. I guess I'll start from the start of this, where we connect on to the N64. So are you basically tapping the same points that any other N64 digital mod would be using?
Correct.
More or less. Okay.
Yes.
So for example, and so for anybody listening who thinks like, because those are installs that are advanced, you typically need somebody to do fine pitch soldering with the ribbon cable. So if something were to be made more consumer friendly of this solution, it would still be at least that level of install anyway.
Yeah. So what you can do, which is what I did, I took those rainbow cables that you use to connect between breadboards, and I just cut it, stripped the wires, and I soldered them onto the duct chip. So you have the RCP, which is the big one with the fine pitch pins, and then those are connected to the DAC chip, which has a slightly wider pins. And what I did, I just overlaid the ribbon cable onto the pins and soldered them, and that is the mess I've got on my table here.
Okay.
So I can send you some pictures later if you want to see. But essentially, it's DIY-able, but it's way cleaner, of course, if you use a flex cable. And I know that a lot of people are really careful with not messing up their hardware. They don't want to do the cuts in the plastic casing and so on. And I respect that. So I would say don't do this if you're one of those. Use a flex cable instead.
That sounds really... Sorry, go ahead. Yep.
Yeah, so actually, someone from the community has reached out to me to help out with designing a flex cable that will be compatible. And we're discussing about how to move forward with that, because there are some optimizations that might require a different pin layout, like how you connect it to the Pico, in which order. So as of right now, that is sort of on hold until I have sort of finished the design. But there is definitely a flex cable sort of in the works. So sometime in the future there will be a flex cable that you can buy and solder on the nice way.
Sure. And that's cool. And I like that you are sticking to your original ideas in this. I mean, it seems to me your idea was, let's do this as cheaply as possible with the most off-the-shelf parts possible. And there are already people doing fantastic N64 digital mods, very professionally made, very good. And cost, they have a fair cost related to that, 100 or in the hundreds sometimes, especially after you had to get a professional installed onto it. So I like that, even though, yes, it's hard, yes, it's a little bit messy, but this is something you can get done at a much cheaper. And I like that you're at least sticking that we can have different projects for different ideas or philosophies.
Yeah, exactly. And also I did it because it was possible. And I just wanted to see, can this be done? Yes, it could. And I'm just, happy to share that. And if anybody wants to do something with it, that's cool. But nobody's forcing you either. If you want to have a really nice mod with, full color depth and all the resolutions and so on, then use one of the nice mods.
So the next step is something I will use our time together for you to explain to me an idea I don't understand. So you spoke about the RGB line is 7 pins on the 64. It's 7 plus 1 for sync. Is that right?
Yep,
There's a total
correct.
of 8, right? So RGB is represented over 7 and sync is an extra 1. So because we often hear this, you can sometimes hear the terminology just thrown around in the community. Oh, this is RGB 555 or 888 or something like that. And talk us through that a little bit, because some people, I feel like, throw this technical point around when they don't really understand. Oh, it's only RGB 777. Oh my God. If I must have RGB 888, the full color spectrum. Some people lose their minds, and I've always thought it's not such a big thing, but walk me through it.
Okay, so you've probably heard about 16 million colors and 24-bit RGB.
Okay.
And that's what most people are using on their desktop machines, and what a lot of people are using. What this is, it's 8 bits per channel, 8 bits of R, 8 bits of G and B. And to represent this color space, you have 0 up to 255 of value per channel. And the N64 has only 7 bits per channel, so it can only do 0 up to 127. So if you want to represent this on an 8-bit or 24-bit screen, you could do it in a few different ways. You could scale it using math, so that it gets evenly distributed, or you just shift it with one position. So essentially, the least significant bit is always 0. So if you're like I can understand the argument of saying that representing RGB 777 on an 888 screen will always look a little bit bad. And I can sort of understand that, because you need to do some conversion. Either you spread it out in an even way, or you just shift it by one position, which is the simple way. And in my case, the frame buffer is not large enough to hold the RGB 24 pixels, which is the output size of the essentially what you see on the DVI screen, the HDMI DVI screen. So what I do is I take from these 777 pixels or bits, I sample either 555 or 565 most significant bits, and I then convert these using just shifting. So yeah, I can understand people arguing that this is not good, it's not accurate and so on, because it's not. It's an approximation, but it might be good enough for some people.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I mean, I guess in retro gaming, we're all a little bit OCD about things. And it's just one of those things. It's always hit me as a bit, it sounds too technical for most people to be like, oh, I know the difference. And for the most part. So, okay. So we're pulling off that. And so when you're sampling the RGB color, and what and is it like a regular RGB sync pulse is the other one? So is it then... Does it just show what a line?
Yeah, we have. There's the
line
H
and the end of a page. Yeah.
Yeah, so the H sync and B sync. There's also 2 other sync signals. There's I think it's C sync and some other sync. I forgot the name. But it's definitely enough sync signals that you can just sort of redirect to a VGA compatible device. So what I'm doing is I'm basically latching or saving the pixels when I'm in the active area. But there is also, it's a little bit interesting, there's some extra borders on the both left and right side, and also on the top and bottom side. So the active picture is sort of a picture within a bigger black picture. So there is some hard-coded offsets that I have, and those could be made into sort of a HUD heads-up display where you sort of have to fine-tune the position of the image and so on. So right now it's just hard-coded, but it actually works quite well with the Mario 64 and 007, which I've tried. Yeah, but I noticed that NTSC that's different. They have different offsets.
Oh, that's a good one, actually. I hadn't. Of course, I hadn't thought that. So, yeah, when you're day to day, are you working on a PAL or an NTSC 64?
So PAL, because that's what we have here in Europe. But NTSC it's kind of interesting. So, from my understanding, is that the difference between a PAL and NTSC version of an N64, it's a couple of things. But one is the PIF chip. And one is the DUC chip. So essentially, you get the different analog output signal, but the digital signal is more or less the same, coming from the RCP. And so you can run a PAL and NTSC ROM on your N64, but the video will look different.
And is that why you were saying you said when you're latching the RGB in coming off the chip that you're running at 50? You mentioned 50 megahertz.
So 50 megahertz is still the same. It's not connected to the 50 hertz that we have on the power lines.
Right.
It just happens to line up.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, I totally forgotten about that. So so you're using mostly PAL N64s because some of the N64s have the easy RGB mod. They're all of the Japanese ones, as far as I understand, all of the Japanese N64s have an easy an easy RGB mod, not HDMI mod, but RGB mod. And that I've installed one of those myself. Voltar sells a small little chip. It's much like his Super Nintendo version, and it basically just gets placed over the pins and you wire it up. So, but yeah, most American N64s, and if I understand, pretty much all PAL ones are the hard RGB mod. Is that right, or what you've seen of PAL ones?
So I don't really know much about the rest of the scene, but what you're saying is probably right. So I'm guessing that the DUC chip is quite different between PAL and NTSC and the Japanese one as well. But the digital signals will still probably be either exactly the same or mostly the same.
Okay.
But I don't want to say any opinions about this because I don't know.
Sure, that's all right. Going back to the design that you use, so you've been latching and sampling the RGB that's coming off. Now, as I understood, this packaging into the DVI spec and the DVI protocol, that is a library. That's an open source library that you reused, if I understand. It seems some very, very smart person has already written this bit of code. Is that right?
That's correct. So it's the Pico DVI project by Luke Wren, and it's an amazing piece of software because it's really like I thought I was pushing the limit, but no, not even close.
So, and there were two versions of so the first version, as I understood, like you were piping the signal sort of over the USB bus into your computer.
Right. So that's the early FPGA-based prototype. So what I was using then was a device called Glasgow, which is it's a multi-purpose tool, which is an FPGA with a USB interface, which lets you write FPGA code and sample data and process data in a certain way, and then pipe it to your computer in a very nice way. So I used that to sample the signals and package them. And then on the host computer, I wrote some scripts that basically unpacked this bit stream of data and sync signals. And I converted that into, on Linux, there's something called Video for Linux, which lets you create a webcam basically using code. So I created a virtual webcam that contained the N64 pixel data in its raw form. And then I could use that in OBS as a camera source.
Sure. Okay, so that was the initial version, because the new versions are using some sort of HDMI, but the Pico doesn't have a HDMI output on it. So what's going on there then? What's in your new version?
Yeah, so that's where I used the Pico DVI project, which I cannot say too much about because I don't really understand it. But using some really clever code and pushing, both high quality assembly code together with like really pushing the PIO, the limits of the PIO, it's able to generate a DVI-D signal. And there's also a continuation of that, or a fork, I don't know what to call it, that actually creates proper HDMI, to my understanding, which bundles sound together with the DVI signal. And what this enables is, sound and video. So maybe this hasn't been clear from the start, but my project does not handle audio. It just handles video. But looking forward, there is potential to add audio as well. I just haven't gotten there.
Sure, we're getting. Actually, it's good that you point that out, because that was sort of implied when with the DVI protocol. If everyone's used DVI, those big ass plugs before, like mini SCART, maybe you want to call them, they don't carry audio at all. There's always got to be a separate audio there. But okay, so the Pico DVI was you could package that up and get the DVI in code, but the Pico still doesn't physically have a HDMI socket on the end. So what are you doing? You soldering something in, or what?
Yeah, correct. So there's an adapter called, I think it's the DVI SOC. Let me just Google that. DVI SOC. If you just Google that, you will find a bunch of places that sell it. And what it is, it's a HDMI contact or connector and a small PCB that fits on the end of the Pico board. So you just solder it. It doesn't require fine pitch soldering. It's very DIY friendly. You just solder it onto there and you're done.
All right, that makes sense. So then you got an actual HDMI, and you were saying that, well, if you jam the DVI signal down the HDMI, it seems to just work, even though it's all not proper HDMI.
It's kind of funny. So most HDMI monitors can understand a DVI-D signal over the same wires. But if you have like a 4K LG TV from this year, it might refuse that signal. So I was actually trying this with my almost brand new TV, and it just refused to work. But I'm working on trying to understand why this happens and try to figure out if there is anything I can do. But my guess is that the resolution is too low. So the native resolution that I'm outputting is 640 by 480. And the frame buffer is 320 by 240. And then I'm upscaling this by 2 in the 2 directions. Okay. But I'm thinking that the TV is refusing the signal because the resolution is too low. I'm guessing that it wants 720p at the lowest. I don't know. But I'm working on it. But it works with I have tried it on a bunch of monitors, and also my old 42-inch TV worked fine. So I think it's just one of those, newer big ones that don't like it.
That makes sense. I wanted to talk a bit. Let's get into the output resolution. So it's a 240p signal coming off the Nintendo 64. You're doubling that up to 480p. So a progressive 480p signal. So you're just doing a integer scale on that, or double,
Yeah, it's literally taking the previous pixel 2 times. It's not doing any interpolation at all. So it's very sharp edges on the pixels. No scale like bilinear scaling or something like that going on. It's just doubling.
Which I like. What's some of your thoughts on the way that? I guess a more philosophical question on the way retro scaling is going. It seems to me that we're entering a phase where we're going to have one system that's doing the digital out, and another system that can accept a 240p or a 480p and then do the upscaling. And upscaling is going to be separate from our digital out solutions. And that meaning that our digital out solutions only need, and it probably only should maybe, be outputting 240p, or sorry, 480p, so many numbers. Anyway, outputting a lower resolution and then letting an external device upscale it. How do you see that playing out, or what are your thoughts on that philosophy that's now seems to be developing in our community?
Yeah, I think that makes sense a lot, especially if you have multiple consoles. But if you only have one, then I can understand you want sort of an all-in-one solution. And for me personally, I don't have a lot of sort of strong opinions on the retro scene and so on. I just do things that are fun. But I kind of agree with that mentality that, you buy one expensive piece of upscaler, and then you have sort of a simple native digital video out mod on each of your console. And if you plug that into that fancy upscaler, then you're good to go. So I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think so too. And it to me, it sounds very analogous to having, a CD player and an amp. The CD player to me is just a transport, and it's connected via a Toslink digital cable to my amp. And then my amp, it takes a digital signal straight from my amp. It's got one good DAC that's inside of my amp. It's got, it's a nice Sony amp. It does a real good job of amplifying it, and I don't need an amplifier in all the different devices, which is something we've accepted for a long time in the world of hi-fi and stereo, but now we're sort of getting there in retro and our analog video community.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. But yeah, going into the audio stuff, that can be a real kind of worms with the clock jitter and stuff like that. And yeah, I'm not gonna open that lid.
Okay, yeah.
Because if your source and the amp is running on different clocks, you might have some phase shift between the clocks and so on. But yeah, let's not.
That's okay. For now, if someone did want to do this mod, they could just take audio straight out of the multi-out anyway. If you wanted to do that, your solution doesn't disable multi-out.
No, exactly. So I actually have an intact analog connector on the back of the device. So I've only just added wires to it. I haven't destroyed it in any way.
Yeah. Okay, so that's very interesting. The way this mod is coming along, and what do you want from it? It's still. Do you want it to be just something that can, like with the Pico cart, now we've got a really nice PCB and you could sort of start to use it. Do you want to get towards something people can use, or what is your hopes for this project?
It's really hard to answer. I made it because it was fun, and that's it. But hearing from the community, I hear a lot of people are really, interested in it, and that makes me, want to take it further. So it would be really cool if I could get to that stage where, you have a flex, you have a PCB, you even have maybe a connector thingy that I don't know really how those modes work. But yeah, from what I understand, it's, you have this kind of, that you replace the backside connector with the HDMI contact and so on. So it would be cool to sort of enable that. But I also thought a little bit more about this, and it would make sense if, these flex cables were compatible with each other. Like if I make my own flex cable that has a different pin out, then it's annoying again. But
That's
I haven't, because I understand people, you mod one system and you're done. You don't really replace the PCB of the mod that often, I guess, or probably never. So I don't know. It's just some thought that I had. So yeah, I don't know really where to go with that, but we'll see.
This might be a place where you can provide some forethinking in the community. If you sort of do the work, you and the community do the work, and you realize, look, these are always the pins. We're always going to need these pins off the chips no matter what happens. There's no some special fancy solution that's going to be discovered later. Sure, maybe to make a standardized flex cable that then, I don't know, a Pico, something else could be put on to help other developers work from there without having to, because I imagine making a flex is a little bit of it requires some specific knowledge. I don't know. Do you get them from PCB Way as well, or where do you get a flex cable from?
Yeah, so I think PCB Way is one of the vendors that that can do it. Okay. But also Osh Park and a bunch of other places. But what I don't have any experience in it, and I understand that people who have experience, they know things about, how much can you bend it, how much space do you need to do this and that, and all of that knowledge that you get from actually doing it. But yeah, so I wanted to look at the 64 HD project and sort of be compatible with that, because from what I haven't received my unit yet, but I ordered one because it's interesting. So I think they use sort of standard flex cables, which would be really nice. That way you don't really need a custom flex cable. But yeah, I don't want to say too much because I don't have my unit yet. I haven't verified everything. But it would be really cool if you can sort of buy an off-the-shelf cable, flex cable, and then just an off-the-shelf connector and make your own board, and that's it. Sure. So that's kind of what I want to go for.
Do you still only have one Nintendo 64 for all this?
I have two. I have one that I haven't soldered in and one that I have soldered a lot in.
Okay, all right. And they're both PAL units?
Yeah.
Okay. Because still, I would say on my recent trip to Japan, I found that Nintendo 64s have really gone up. Before the pandemic, it was bargain bin, a couple of dollars per unit. And especially with Nintendo 64, it's hard to find a broken one. It's been stepped on, it's been thrown off a cliff, but still, it works. It's not like the PlayStation 1, now the laser doesn't work anymore. I found very hard, even in Japan now, to find like a real good deal on a Nintendo 64, and you're up for $30-40 at sort of, somewhere around this as a sort of a minimum these days. But I can understand maybe you need to get a couple more in there as well, but it's nice you've got your good one.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of feel the need for an NTSC version because I don't have one. That would be nice to be able to test stuff on it. But fortunately, I know people who have, and it's easy to reach out to people and have stuff tested externally. But of course, once you have to solder in your unit, people are less happy to do that, of course.
That's cool. So, all right, we've almost been going an hour about. One thing, so if someone's listening and they want to get into your projects, it does sound like the Pico Cart Lite version, the one that's designed to just use the Pico, sounds like a very accessible project for people to do. So for them, is it just about getting the PCB? They should order themselves from a PCBWay type service or something like that?
Yeah, correct. So what you need is you download the Gerbers from my GitHub. And the Gerbers is the basically CAD files for the PCB. And you upload them to the PCB service, for example, PCBWay or JLC PCB or something like that. And then you get your PCBs a couple of weeks later. Okay. And then you just use an ordinary Raspberry Pi Pico and solder it onto there. But the thing is, the Raspberry Pi Pico has only 2 megabytes of flash, which is very little. So you won't be able to run any commercial games on that. However, there are sort of Pico clones that you can buy that have 16 megabytes of flash. And I've been able to run, Super Mario 64 and other games, which is possible. And to do that, you basically have to go to AliExpress and on there find a suitable clone. I have some names in the GitHub that you can search for, I think. If not, I'll make it more clear for what to search for. But essentially, there are decent clone boards. And what these do, they give you more flash so that your ROM can be larger. But what people still need to understand is that this is not sort of comparable to like the EverDrive and stuff like that, because there is not 64 megabytes. You cannot have those big flashes, those big ROMs on this device. So that's sort of what the version 2 is aspiring to solve. But it's not done yet. But what is done today is up to 16 megabytes.
Okay. That's still cool, though. That's cool that can be available. And some games fit in 16 megabytes. I assume Super Mario 64, because you were showing it.
Yeah.
Okay, so Super Mario 64 fits in 16 megabytes anyway. Okay. Yeah. That's very interesting.
So the thing is, the 16 megabytes of flash, that contains both the firmware and the game ROM. So some games are like actually 16 megabytes. So I actually added some compression there as well. So the ROM is slightly compressed. So the issue is that some games might be a little bit too large. So not all 16 megabyte games will work on this, just so people know.
Do you have any... Oh, sorry,
Yeah, but the point is, if you want to write homebrew, this is a perfect way to sort of get started because it's so cheap and it's easy to get started.
Do you have any more of the Pico Cart Lite PCBs? Do you have any extras of those when you ordered them?
I have a handful of them. I didn't order like 50 of them, but they are dirt cheap. Like you can order them for, I think you get 5 boards for like $2. You pay more for the shipping. So I don't know. Maybe you can like do a group order and order, I don't know, 50 or 20 of them and then just, share the cost with some friends.
Cool, man. All right. So as we're wrapping it up now, we've heard about the sort of the 2 big projects. There's something else, some other projects that you're working on or something you're thinking about that's ticking away in the back of your mind that you got bubbling next that you want to share with us?
Not right now, actually. There's a little bit too much going on right now. So right now, what I want to focus on is getting the HDMI mod sort of in a almost in a better state. Right now, it's a proof of concept, but it works.
Okay, fair enough. And for the community efforts you're doing with your Discord, is there some particular help that you need or some specific skills, or you've mostly got those people, but it's just time to work on it, or is there something you're specifically looking for right now?
If so, somebody who knows PIO and ARM assembly on low level to optimize that kind of stuff.
All right, cool, man. All right. Well, Konrad, thank you very much. It's been a very interesting hour to go over your projects. I wish you the best with everything. It's so cool that you're hacking this stuff. We absolutely need these efforts. Do it on the cheap because something good comes out of it. So, Konrad, thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for listening. This has been Zez Retro. See you next time.